Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
All right. So thank you for having me here, and it's actually not just a pleasure; it's a privilege to be here in this symposium in honor of Professor Satyamurthy. I can't claim to have known Professor Satyamurthy for as long as many of you have known him. Each time I have, emerged learning something from Professor Satyamurthy, and it's been happening consistently over the last few years. So I'm going to talk about fractal-like self-assembly in putative protein today, inspired by some cryo-EM experiments. So fractals are self-similar constructs and all that, and natural fractals, as I'll tell you, have certain limitations. But as I was going forward, what I noticed is Professor Satyamurthy himself has worked on fractals in the 90s. So I picked up these papers from you, and I wish you a very happy birthday in advance. This is from yesterday, by the way. So another extempore conversation at the poster session, and may you continue to inspire us, Professor Satyamurthy. So I'm going to this is the other direction. So fractals in nature, if you think about it, we have all heard of snowflakes, which are natural fractals. Plants tend to have fractal-like signatures, and it turns out that even lightning bolts, if you study the mathematical patterns, they have some kind of a fractal tendency. These are mathematical constructs, but they exhibit some kind of scaling symmetry. I'll talk about that a little bit more. But natural fractals are imperfect, so they deviate from that mathematical ideality. They only work at intermediary scales. So if I scale up a fractal infinitely, it's going to fail. And in the context of a protein, I'm going to try to say why. And they're only roughly self-similar. So I'm going to talk about this particular fractal today, Sierpinski fractal. I'll come to the details of it. Now, I'm probably one of the few people who don't actively do quantum mechanics here. But again, this is what Professor Pal also indicated. There are many multi-scale methods when we talk of theory and computations. I'm not going to go over this because this audience knows it. This is kind of roughly in a log-log scale. I work in this domain where we use statistical mechanics in conjunction with empirical potentials to kind of come up with predictions for many of these soft matter systems. So one of the problems we have been working on for a long time, I think many people are working on it across the world, is the so-called protein folding problem. In brief, even if you consider a small 100 residue protein and give it maybe 1 picosecond or so, or a fraction of a picosecond even, to sample every degree of freedom, the total sampling time will exceed the age of the universe. It's called the Levinthal's paradox. So this cannot be an unbiased search. So this protein folding problem, there has to be certain thermodynamic factors which bias it, towards a very definitive folded state. And that happens whether you're in the biological context or whether you're completely doing an in vitro experiment. So I'm just highlighting some of the key features. In the interest of time, I will not go over those details so much. So inspired by certain basic problems in our group, we have, I'll just quickly go over it. So many people talked of these energy landscapes for chemical systems. When you have a biological system, when you have a macromolecule such as a protein, it becomes even more complicated. So it's inherently multidimensional, and when these structural biologists propose a state, it is usually a crystal structure, more often than not. But it is not exactly the global minimum, because the biological energy landscape is actually way more complicated. You have several hills and valleys, and you also have things which are opened up, which are disordered aggregates, and then you also have putative fibrils, very well-ordered fibrils. So how does this disorder to order transition happen? And can we induce certain transitions? That is also something we are working on. So again, another example, the standard amyloid fibril assembly. It's a nucleated polymerization mechanism. Can we actually modulate this assembly by, doing certain things, changing the conditions, so on and so forth. So these are some of the problems we have worked on so far. So self-assembly, structural modifications. So I'm just citing some of the work we have done over the last, whatever, 10, 15 years maybe. Entropic correlations, entropy is something that, I'm not citing it, but we just published a chapter on that. We are also working on modern machine learning methods to capture the biomolecular energy landscapes. Now, the problem here is multifold. We do not know what these landscapes are a function of. What we assign as collective variables, they rigorously may not have an index of -1. So it's very difficult to assign so-called transition states here. And then it's even more challenging to kind of know what these are. They are really not reaction coordinates. Are the order parameters suitable? Can we, project them onto, nearly orthogonal spaces, so on and so forth. But we have been working on it. We have come up with a Bayesian-based method we call this algorithm EMMD, expectation maximized molecular dynamics. We have applied it to kinases. We have applied it to disordered assemblies. And we have also tried to predict how a membrane curves when you insert a protein into it. So I'll come back to fractals. This is what today's talk is about. And essentially, it is the master's thesis of a student who just passed out. She's in the physics department of Ohio State right now. So fractals are self-similar mathematical constructs. Okay, so you can write certain equations and you can kind of grow them in principle infinitely. So they're geometrically unchanged upon magnification. So an ideal snowflake, if the way it will appear in the micron scale, it should also appear the same way geometrically on the centimeter scale. So they should, in principle, obey scaling symmetry or scale invariance. But actual fractals may not be so. Okay, so I'm going to focus, as I said, on this Sierpinski fractal, which is actually an equilateral triangle broken up into pieces. So this one is an equilateral triangle, geometrically equivalent units recursively removed. So I'm starting top down. Each original piece will break into 3 smaller units if I cut the size into half. Okay, so hence we can come up with a fractal dimension which is logarithm of n by r. N is defined this way and r this way. So you come up with 1.585. I'm going to use this number much later. What you also have are these voids. Okay, so things which are mathematical voids. But again, when you come back to a natural system, what roles do these voids have? That is the other question that is relevant. All right, so when my student Manaswini was trying to find a suitable problem to work on, she started looking at amyloids, but then it turned out some people have tried to treat amyloids as fractals. But just around that time, coincidentally, we ran into this paper, which was from the Max Planck Institute in Marburg, I think terrestrial microbiology or something. This Nature paper presenting cryo-EM data, low resolution cryo-EM data. See, these are about 10 nanometers, suggesting that one particular enzyme, citrate synthase, can actually adapt, get into fractals. Okay, they tweaked the conditions. They made a mutation. So this is probably does not happen in an actual biological scenario, but nonetheless, you have what looks very much like a Sierpinski triangle. So these are homo-oligomeric assemblies. Okay, I'm not going to go into the function, but they can be induced to self-assemble into Sierpinski triangles. So by this, now again, some of the details. So you do have, so basically you have, this is, each of these blobs is a dimeric unit. The dimer is, dimerization happens very, easily. This is level 0, level 1, level 2, hexamer, 3 dimers into a hexamer, times 3, 18 mer, times 4, 50. So we have a hexamer, 18 mer, 54 mer, and maybe a 162 mer. So that is the speculation, though they did not present it. So, but you have 2 kinds of dimers. You have some free dimers, which are kind of, more like quote unquote magnets. It can attract more units there. Or you can have more or less inert dimers at the interface. Okay. So again, I'm not going to go into the experimental detail, what they did to actually get into these Sierpinski-like fractals. What turns out that when you look at these different interfaces, you can actually assign certain dihedral angles. Okay, you take 1.4 points and make 2 sets of dihedral angles. with an 18 mer and a 54 mer construction. So what we came up with is we mapped all the possibilities of all the dihedrals that one can, essentially get from the center of Mars. So the thing is, when we noticed this, we wrote to the authors. We said, you have this data, you have the coordinates, we would like to simulate it. They discouraged us. They told us it's so low resolution, what you'll get is not good. It's going to be misleading, don't do it. We ignored them. And why did we do that? Because we had some data. We actually tricked AlphaFold 2, okay, which is, the 2024 Nobel Prize for Protein Structure Prediction. We asked AlphaFold 2 to actually use the, low resolution data as a template to actually give us high resolution data, and it worked. So I'm going to again skip, some of the details. We did a template-based modeling. We, got the first rank. There were disordered loops, which we again actually had to invoke some other algorithms to do it. So essentially we got something like this. This looks like a dimer. And okay, I'm just going to skip those citations. And then we had to go to the multimer. So obeying the rules of the Sierpinski triangle, we managed to go back and forth between coarse-grained and the atomistic resolution. Again, doing a lot of iteration before we actually were able to build a 54 mer, obeying the mathematical rules of the Sierpinski triangle. So when we got this, when we got to the point of doing molecular dynamics, the number of particles we hit were maybe about a few million. Okay, which was impossible to do with the kind of hardware that we have. So we had to coarse grain. So we had to sacrifice some degrees of freedom, coarse grain it. We used the Martini-Go-like model, and we had now enough data. So this is the movie of the 18 mer, okay? So the reason I'm showing this movie is when you get, let's say, cryo-EM data, what you're getting is one picture, just a snapshot. You have no idea about the dynamics, you have no idea about the detailed thermodynamics, but actually doing simulations to the extent possible gives you some insight into what it can look like, okay? So the dynamics obeys the constraints. So we were always looking at the Sierpinski rules and making sure that, this construct actually obeys those constraints. So again, I'm going to skip this. We evaluated the stability. So it was stable at 2 mer, 6 mer, 18 mer. 54 mer, we could not simulate much because we did not have that amount of computational hardware. Even with coarse graining, it was scaling too much. Also, I'm going to come back to this later. In the experiments, they actually showed that there were very few of these elements which were 12 mer. 12 mer, 14 mer, which were not within the Sierpinski scaling, okay? Which suggests that you can also have off-track oligomerization, but infrequently. So we kept these aside. So here you have a 12 mer and some of these odd constructs. Okay. So having, done the simulations, we first evaluated the dynamic cross-correlation. It's kind of self-obvious. You have some kind of a mean position. You look at the, the variance in the position and the deviations. And if Cij between residue pair I and j, if it's higher, if it's 1 more towards the red side, the dynamics is correlated. If more towards the blue side, it is less correlated. So when we have the monomer, the 2 mer, looks like each protein is internally very well correlated and not correlated with the other part. Okay? So these are the mer2, the dimer. If I go to the mer6, the hexamer, now what starts happening is there is cross correlation between different units. So 2 units are starting to behave as 1. So there's some rigidity creeping in. And if you go further and look at 18 mer, you see, so this is 6, 6, 6. They're very strongly correlated. Every 6 is behaving as, so 1/3 of what we have is behaving like a rigid unit. Okay. So then we also checked those dihedral angles that we talked about. We checked the stability. So we had collected a lot of statistics. So we checked the dihedral angles over time. Okay, all right. So it's not moving as I wish. So what we found is that the dihedral angle deviation is not correlated with the energetic interaction. But if I look at, again, there is, at the interface, there's a particular salt bridge that they have designed. that salt bridge is a very important constraint, this distance, the salt bridge distance with the energy, it has some kind of a positive correlation. So it turns out that you have to employ certain constraints at the interfaces in order to kind of build this Sierpinski triangle. All right. The other thing that we did again was so remember we have voids here. So there's some gap over here. What is the volume of that void? Now, given that it's a very non-uniform surface, we had to kind of come up with something which will allow us to quantify that void. What we did was, again, I give credit to the student. She actually went and picked up this journal from a literature survey. It's in mathematical geosciences. And they use Fibonacci sampling. Essentially, you come to the center of mass. I've not put the algorithm here, and shoot vectors randomly across, and then calculate the size of the vectors. So what you can do is essentially come up with what you may call an effective radius of the void. They call it radius of gyration, though that's a little bit of a misnomer. So from this point, you shoot rays randomly, and there are certain mathematical transformations, and you can come up with the essential radius of the void. And it turns out, if you look at this, so there's some statistics here. If you normalize this and you look at the void of the 18 mer, there's if you use the number of subunits as the denominator, there's a constriction. And for the 12 mer, which is not feasible for the Fibonacci sampling, you have two distributions. You have one lower void and an upper void. So these are features that we looked at. All right. So if you look at the, again, radius of gyration of the full thing itself, I'll come back to it. If you include the transient modes, there's a different scaling. If you include the, I'll come back to this later on. If you do not include the transient scaling, you'll get a different part of, different kind of scaling. We were also able to, assuming this is equilibrium, we were able to also quantify the specific heat, which comes from the variance of the energy by RT square. And more or less, it's a little bit superlinear, but then maybe, more statistics would show that CV is actually more or less linear. All right. So when we were looking at fluctuations, again, I would like you to pay attention to this graph. Of course, for the 18 mer, if I have a dimer, tetramer, hexamer, okay, so these are low fluctuations at the dimer, trimer, at the low oligomerization level. When I have an 18 mer, the fluctuations go up, but intermediary ones, 12 mer, for example, the fluctuations go up significantly, which means that the 12 mer somehow does not want to obey the rules. Or in other words, if I really want to force the 12 mer to become some kind of a fractal, I have to compensate for a huge entropic barrier. Okay. So again, if I look at the energy, we have scaled it, okay, with the minimum energy. This kind of assumes more or less a linear form. And then we look at the entropy. Now, when you have a huge classical system, it's very non-trivial to find the entropy, but this is Schlitter's method, which is very well used for those of us who do protein simulations. You look at the mass-weighted covariance matrix, diagonalize it, and what you get is essentially an upper limit of the entropy. So if you look at the entropy is more or less scaling as 0.9, nearly linear. But if you look at the subunits, this is the overall entropy. This is the overall entropy of the entire system. Okay, so the energy is going down, the entropy is going up. But if you do the math, ignoring all the solvent contributions, it looks like, there's a huge entropic penalty to be paid if we want to grow this. But if I look at the subunits, if I look at individual subunits, okay, just the entropy, even at the individual monomer level, entropy goes up. Okay, so this does not scale perfectly, at least with the data that we have. But then, you have to, the entropy is essentially going up. So what we have argued is, so this I'm just showing, this is 12 mer. This is the odd case. This is a 12 mer. So this is a non-interface, this is one of these ones. But then again, the entropy is kind of very significant in terms of scale up for this. So, okay. So again, finally what we did was we looked at, this is a very well-known theory, Fleury's theory for understanding how polymers collapse. So there's a power law relationship between the radius of gyration and the length of the polymer chains. And if you have a good solvent where, good solvent which compactifies the polymer, you will get the scaling factor as 1/3, 0.3 or something. For a poor solvent, it will be more extended, so you'll get about 0.6. But then, this is, nearly 70 years old, more than that. But this has been now modified to accommodate things like proteins, because proteins are not very simple polymers. There are 20 possibilities, a variety of, characteristics. So the modified theory for proteins coming from Fleury's theory includes excluded volume to repulsions, elastic energy. So the total energy kind of scales in some way with the Rg. Okay, so there's a 1 by Rg cube here, Rg square here. These are, the volume of the excluded volume, the effective Hooke's constant, and the average number of contacts. But assuming equilibrium, if I do del E by del Rg equal to 0, I'll get effectively Rg proportional to some kind of n to the power alpha by 2 by 5 alpha, where the authors have assigned alpha to some kind of a fractal dimension. So this 2009 paper, published in the Journal of Polymer Science, had already suggested that, you might get some kind of a fractal dimension if you're going to, kind of have self-assembly for proteins. So here what we did was, here I am reporting Rg with the number of residues, and see we are going up to 7,000 residues. So if I look at my Sierpinski triangle, you can see the Sierpinski growth here. I'm going to get alpha. Remember, I had the fractal number as 1.585. My nu is theoretically coming up to 0.45. And if I do the scaling, I'm going to get 0.48, 0.47 or something. So basically, there's a good agreement between this number and this number. Now, as a cross-check, we had to understand whether this is unique for this particular citrate synthase which grows into a Sierpinski fractal or for everything else. So Rubisco happens to be a protein which is also prone to self-assembly, but it's a very compact protein. It's a globular protein. So for Rubisco, your alpha is much lower. It scales, there's a greater suppression of the Rg with growing number. But on the other hand, actin is a protein which very quickly polymerizes. It becomes a linear polymer. Alpha is nearly 1. Okay, so these are again additional simulations we had to do to make sure that our Sierpinski actually scales with, as a fractal as we go forward. So our central message, which I'm going to come to, was published very recently in the JPhys ChemB in a special issue called The Cutting Edge of Theoretical and Computational Biophysics. This is again the master's thesis work of Manaswini. And so essentially our message is that when you have protein fractals, and I'm going to extrapolate a little bit to biomolecular assembly in general, you'll get scaling relationships, sterics and fluctuations. They kind of intermingle to limit very higher order fractal growth. So, you cannot really have, say, 162 MERS of this kind of a protein fractal. So that is our central message. And, where do we go from here? So we are trying to understand if fractals can offer an alternative pathways for disease. Many of these protein self-assemblies, such as amyloids and other stuff, are responsible for disease, but can we tweak conditions such that we have things where, which can be captured more easily? Can there be vehicles for small molecule binding and release? Can we generalize the spatiotemporal scaling? We are working on reduced representations and backmapping. Can we deform them? We are seeing if these possibly can induce phase transitions. And again, if there are experimentalists willing to talk to us, we would probably like to suggest a few things. So with that, I would like to thank you for hearing me out. And I would also like to thank my wonderful group. It's a privilege to work with these people. And this work especially was by Manaswini Subramanian. She was accepted into the physics department of Ohio State. She is algorithmically gifted, if I can say that. She can actually really design algorithms on her own. She'll come and show me the results even before I have asked her to do something. Of course, so our group is called the Molecular Computations Energetics and Dynamics Group. We call it MCED. That is like an energy landscape. And I'm grateful to IISA Kolkata for the support, to SERB, and to the National Supercomputing Mission, especially Param Rudra at SN Bose Center in Kolkata, for all the support. And please, thank you for listening to me.
Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.